So I've been wanting to make a video like this for a while because I think there are things to be learned from how I approached this whole thing when I started out making music back in, when was it? 2006-07 maybe. I had dabbled a bit with Reason before that, but I didn't really get going until then. So when I started out making music solely in the box, like most people who started out at the same time. I had a copy of some DAW. Can't remember which. I think I started out with Acid, maybe. I mainly made music with VSTs for the first period of time. But I think I got the advice from a friend of mine who had been making music longer than me that it would probably be a good idea to get at least one hardware synth to get something that was a bit more easily tweakable than what was the case if you were gonna do this just with the keyboard and the mouse. Because back then we didn't really have all the kinds of controllers and stuff you have today. It was probably sound advice. I can definitely see the point of that, but the only problem with it was that it led me down a route which I didn't really manage to get out of before. I think I was on that route for at least 6-7 years before I managed to catch myself and realize what I was doing, because I soon found myself in a position where I would simply look for the next new shiny thing to get, and which was supposedly gonna make my music great. Spoiler alert for this video, such a thing doesn't exist. So I found myself selling the Prophet 8, which I had gotten first, the one with the horrible knobs, if you're old enough to remember that one, and which was a great synth, I'm sure. I soon found myself tempted by other stuff, so I think I can't remember exactly how the timeline looked, but I had a bunch of drum machines, and I had a bunch of synths over the time. I had all the Electron stuff. I had various Moogs, Dave Smith synths, and I eventually found myself in the modular world, which is a completely different story, which I'm not gonna go into now, but that's somewhere you don't want to go if you're easily tempted by gear, to put it that way. So, and this wasn't only hardware. I mean, it was in many ways the same thing with software. I had got a bunch of different plugins over the years. I think I even switched up my DAW a couple of times, which is to me now really silly. I mean, there might be better DAWs out there than Ableton Live as well, but I mean, it's the one I know and the one I work quickly in. And if you watch any of my past videos, you know that I'm all about trying to work as quickly as possible, and that's kind of hard if you're trying to learn stuff. The point of this is I found myself in a position where I was constantly tempted by stuff that promised to make my music great. Since I then ended up just keeping stuff for a very short amount of time, I mean, I bought and sold stuff before I've even learned how to use them properly. I found myself in a position where I got somewhat decent at learning new machines, but I never really got to the point where I mastered anything. I mean, this was the story of my first 6-7 years of making music before I caught myself and realized what I was doing. What we need to remember is that music gear, whether it's a guitar or drum set or a synthesizer or a pedal or a sequencer or a MIDI controller, is that they are at their core simply a tool that you have to learn how to use. And that learning takes a lot of time. So if you constantly switch it out, you will never get to the point where you learn it properly. It's when you get to the point where you know it really well that you can actually start to master it and make it your own. Up until then, you're probably just doing the stuff that everyone else is doing with it. That is basically what I failed to do in my first years of making music, because I never really got to the point where I got beyond the learning phase and started to master anything. Very much related to this, there is no magic bullet. Despite what all the ads and reviews and videos you see on social media and here on YouTube, there is no magic to you making great music. The only thing that would guarantee that you make great music is by putting in the time. So, but I mean, I myself have been guilty of thinking this many times. And the thing is, even if I deep down probably knew that this was the case, I can't even name the times. I don't have it's quite ridiculous to think back to all the times I bought some sort of gear, kind of hoping that it would make my music great, only to receive it and realize that, oh, this is just another thing I have to learn. And I'm gonna have to put in a lot of time on using this and learning this before I get to that point. Because, I mean, what you have to remember is that the people showing them off to you has done what I said earlier in this video. They have put in the time. They have made themselves great musicians by practicing over and over again. And the reason why they are chosen to show this machine off to you is probably because they are great musicians and great at learning these kind of things and mastering them. And they have put in the time, something you haven't done yet. So what I think you need to do to get good at this is trying to stick to one studio setup for a longer period of time. That is basically the only way you'll ever master it and the only way you'll get good at making music. That is the only way you'll ever learn something properly, because as I said many times now, if you just switch it out all the time, you never get to that phase. And I mean, a bit of a disclaimer, this might not apply to everyone. I see a lot of people with large studios making great music, but I know for me personally that has never really worked. So I'm also a strong believer, at least for myself, that studio setup can't really be too large, because I will easily get overwhelmed if I have too many options. I will often find myself jumping between stuff and never really sticking to something, and as I said, learn how to make music with that thing properly. It can also lead to sort of like decision paralysis if you have too many options. You don't really know where to start because the options are basically just endless and you can never make a decision. I don't think it's a coincidence that many people who make music think back to their early days of making music as sort of like the highlight, because back then they only had like a few things and they had to cram every little thing out of that synth or that machine they had, or that piece of hardware, that piece of software. So I don't think that is a coincidence. When you have little, you have to learn how to use that thing as good as possible. It's something you don't really have to when your options are endless. So how do I approach this myself? Well, as if you've seen any of my other videos, you probably know that I ended up selling a lot of my hardware last year. Because even if I got better at this after having made music for about 6-7 years, it's still been a bit of a problem for me when I had too much. Last year I kind of figured out that I didn't need all of this stuff anymore, so I slimmed my setup down pretty significantly, meaning I got rid of most of my hardware stuff. I basically have one synth left, which I haven't been able to get rid of. So but besides that, I'm working in the box now. The main point here is that I find that I need to focus on a few things at a time and don't trying to use everything at once. I mean, even when I work in the box, I have quite a lot of plug-in instruments and a lot, but I don't try to learn them all at the same time. I often find myself using just a couple of instruments at a time and learning those really good. It's often the same things I come back to, because most of these things can do quite a lot of things. I've sort of gotten wise enough to realize that it's not the instruments that hold me back, it's my ability to make music with them. At the same time, I'm also wary of being too concerned with workflow. It's a word I kind of hate, because it's both because I don't think such a thing exists, a perfect workflow, and also because I've been guilty of searching for the perfect workflow for quite a lot of years, or quite a long time. I think the whole concept is a bit bollocks, to be honest. It sort of implies that there is one perfect way for you working, which I don't believe. I think it implies that if you find this perfect workflow, you need to work that way always. As most of us know, it will shift. Even if I advocate sticking to one studio setup, this way we work will vary a bit over time. And I think the biggest problem with the whole workflow concept is that you will very easily end up on this path that I found myself on, where you search for the perfect workflow and you constantly look for new things to make it better. So I don't think it's a good path to follow. Stick to the stuff you have, but don't be too worried about whether this is the perfect way of working for you or not, because most likely the way you work will evolve a bit over time. I'm not really preaching minimalism or not buying anything at all here. It's not what I'm saying. I mean, I still buy stuff now and then. I recently bought something. I recently bought this Torso Electronics T1 sequencer. after watching a couple of videos. So my, but I mean, the point is, I could possibly, if I approached this the same way now that I did back in 2010, I would probably have sold something to buy this thing, or I would probably make this thing the center of my music making setup. But I know that this thing, there's no way in hell this thing is gonna make my music great, and I can tell you that it's I've tried it a bit. It's cool. Do I make better music with this than I did with so I could push on a MIDI keyboard? No, it's horrible. I mean, it's pretty crap what I make with this at this point. I don't expect myself to make the same, maybe as good as this as the people I see on social media using it. Do I think this could possibly be a cool, do I think this possibly could be a cool addition to the studio down the line? Yeah, I think so, maybe. But it's gonna take time to learn it. The point is, I'm not really doing much to my setup, even if I buy something like this. It's just something I try to introduce gradually into my studio, and I might use it, I might not use it. I'm definitely not switching my studio upside down because I got this new thing, and I certainly don't expect it to do much to my music until I've learned it properly. So yeah, this was a bit of a rambly video. As I said, it's okay to buy stuff, it's okay to own stuff you don't use all the time. Just don't make it very hard for yourself by having too much stuff out there at all times, so you don't really know where to start, and focus on one thing at a time when you want to learn something. That is the only way you can get good at it, and it's the only way it will probably make your music better. If you introduce too many options at a time, you will make it very hard for yourself. That's for sure. So yeah, that's more or less what I wanted to say today. Keep making music. Always remember that you will get much better at making music by actually making music than watching tutorials here on YouTube. It's been a pleasure as always, and I'll see you next week.